Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Untold Tales from this side of nowhere. My name is Connor Jones, and I am your host on this podcast. Thanks for joining us. This week, our podcast is sponsored by Basin Pharmacy. Basin Pharmacy is your hometown pharmacy in Basin, Wyoming, and it is also a great source for over-the-counter medicine, vitamins, and supplements. They also carry office supplies, Russell Stover chocolates, and greeting cards. The friendly folks at Basin Pharmacy are happy to help with any of your medicinal needs, whether you have a prescription to fill or a question about your meds. You can stop in Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and Saturdays from 9 a.m. to noon. We're also sponsored by the Wyoming Welcome Program. The folks at the Wyoming Welcome Program are excited about their service called Table Talk. They place brochures on restaurant tables in Cody and Powell that are filled with fun facts about Wyoming, jokes, and the month's holidays, which are nice to know about now that we're past all the major holidays. We need something to celebrate this time of year when it's so dark and cold. Anyways, in addition to this information, they include advertisements from local businesses. So if you're interested in being included in a brochure and getting your business out there, please send them an email. Their service is affordable and effective. And you can reach them at Haley J, that's HALEYJ, at wyomingwelcome.com. And now, the podcast. The temperatures have dropped considerably, and we've even gotten quite a bit of snow here in northwestern Wyoming. I spent Christmas and New Year's up in Butte, Montana at Haley's folks' place, and they got some snow, and it wasn't a terribly white Christmas, but by the New Year there was a good amount of snow on the ground, and it's really starting to feel like a northwestern Rocky Mountain winter finally. So we're headed back to school. I have work here in just a little bit, and the kiddos will come back on Monday. So as teachers, we got to go back in before the students arrive and button things up from last semester and get ready for the new one. So I'm about ready to go back to school, and I definitely miss my students. So I've got that to look forward to on Monday. With these freezing temperatures, I've been thinking a lot about freezing, and I guess that's what's prompted this story. This week's story is called, Is It Frozen? Is It Safe? Which, well, you'll see how it plays into this story. So, here goes. Episode 51 of Untold Tales from This Side of Nowhere. It has been said that you know the ice is safe to walk on when it's at least 4 inches thick. Unfortunately, the best way to determine the thickness of the ice is to cut a hole through it, which usually entails walking out onto its surface, at which point you'll probably find out pretty quickly how safe it is to walk on. Another proven method of determining whether it's safe to venture out on the ice is to send a friend who weighs more than yourself out onto it first. If you happen to be the person gravity has the most claim to in your friend group, you can always try convincing someone else to carry a heavy object out onto the ice before you give it a try. But this is easier said than done, because any friend who is worth their salt will have already shoved you out onto the ice, since they know you're the heaviest person in the group. As my old scoutmaster Eli Lyman used to say, you can always find more friends. To be honest, I have a definite fear of falling through ice. It seems to be a pretty common theme for winter adventure movies. The protagonist or someone the protagonist cares about falls through thin ice and is trapped underneath. They swim around desperately, looking for a way back to the surface. If someone the protagonist cares about has fallen into a frozen lake, the protagonist undoubtedly has to do the heroic thing and jump in to save their girlfriend or buddy or what have you. And thankfully, in most of the movies I've watched, they make it out all right. There was that one Jurassic Park movie where they added swimming dinosaurs to the falling through the ice trope, and I can think of few things that would be more terrifying. I mean, wasn't falling through the ice enough? Come on, Spielberg. This piece, in fact, is not about falling through the ice, but it does have to do with freezing things. While I'm not an avid ice fisherman, I do happen to have a lot of experience with freezing, and not just in the outdoors. You see, like any other family that ate a lot of wild game, we owned a ginormous chest freezer. Just allow me to say that chest freezers are marvelous. My Grandma and Grandpa Jones had a chest freezer that survived both the Second World War and, fittingly, the Cold War. In spite of its age, it still keeps stuff frozen solid. It probably could survive nuclear warfare, and to this day maintains a cool -10 degrees. Going into the pump house where Grandma's freezers were stored was like entering Tutankhamun's tomb. It was dark, musty, and there were jars full of various preserved foods lining the shelves. The two chest freezers lay heavily on the concrete floor like so many sarcophagi, and their contents were both carefully wrapped and preserved for years to come. If the ancient Egyptians had access to chest freezers, I'm sure they wouldn't have embalmed the pharaohs. They would have frozen them instead. Just to be clear, there were no bodies in Grandma's chest freezers, but they probably wouldn't have been a bad hiding place. For one thing, it's nearly impossible to find anything in a chest freezer. It's almost as bad as the fridge. Ask any man, if his wife sends him to retrieve an item from the freezer, she might as well be asking him to find life on Mars. The freezer is massive, and chances are she put anything she wants you to get out of the freezer in there herself. "Dear, can you please go get some California mix from the chest freezer?" she'll ask. First off, I don't even know what a California mix is. It could be a playlist for all I know. Second, she assumes I'll be able to find said California mix. "Honey, is there any California mix in our freezer?" I ask. "There should be," she replies. "There should be fish in the creek behind our house, too." I actually don't say that part out loud. I learned a long time ago, talking about fishing at a time like this is never a good idea. "I put some in there," she continues. It's amazing the confidence she places in me. Amelia Earhart put a plane in the Pacific Ocean, and I probably have a better chance of finding it than I do of finding a California mix in our chest freezer. I, of course, tell her there's probably no point to my looking for the California mix, and explain that it will be much faster if she looks for it while I continue working on dinner for her. "Just pop out to the garage, dear. I've got things under control in here," I say. I can be very convincing when I want to be. When I get to the garage, I pull on the winter gloves I brought with me and prepare for the arduous task ahead. A cloud of steam rolls out A cloud of frozen air rolls out and engulfs me as I lift the lid on the freezer and peer into its shadowy interior. Inside, I see paper-wrapped packages with dates and the name of various cuts of meat. Tubes of ground elk are wedged into the gaps, and here and there I see a bag of frozen corn and peas. No California mix is readily visible. And so it begins. Standard procedure for searching for items in a deep freeze includes pawing at the items floating on the top to see if what you want will come bubbling up. If you're lucky, your quarry will emerge with its hands up, but that's only if you're lucky. I'm not lucky. I sigh and begin lifting items from the freezer and stacking them off to one side. Frozen meals and a frozen pizza or two. Something unidentifiable in a clear Ziploc bag. If I were the one who stocked the freezer, this would be much easier. But anyone can access the thing. It's not even locked. I wouldn't be surprised if there's even something the neighbor kids put in here. One time, my twin brother Fred acquired some deer hide with which to tie grasshopper flies. He, of course, does the logical thing and decides to place the hide in his deep freezer. Being a resourceful guy, he uses what is most readily at hand to store the hide. In this case, an empty frozen burrito bag. Like I said, he's very resourceful. When he goes to the deep freeze, he finds a perfect spot right on top that is exactly the size of the frozen burrito bag into which he just crammed his deer hide. He deposits the frozen burrito bag in the little space he discovered and closes the lid, planning to retrieve the hide the next time he ties some flies. He doesn't give the deer hide another thought for about a week, until one afternoon he gets a call at work. It's his wife. Apparently, she was looking for some frozen burritos for lunch and was very surprised, and not in a good way, to discover a frozen deer hide rather than frozen burritos. How was he supposed to know the perfect little frozen burrito-shaped hole was the spot where his wife had put the frozen burritos prior to emptying the bag? It was an innocent mistake anyone could make if they hadn't been the one to put the burritos in the freezer in the first place. I was wishing I had been the one to put the California mix in our freezer. Towers of frozen food teeter around me, and I'm only halfway to the bottom of the freezer. As I lift out a bag of night crawlers that were left over from a fishing trip, I make a mental note that I had better thaw those later. That's when it happens. My elbow hits a pile of frozen elk steaks, which fall sideways into a pile of freezer meals. I grab at the steaks and manage to knock half the freezer meals on the ground. One of the offending steaks slides right into a frozen ham that I've carefully balanced on the edge of the freezer. In horror, I watch as the ham rocks gently from side to side. I can't move because if I do, the sea of frozen food I'm holding back will fall all over the hot, dirty garage floor. For a moment, I think the ham just might stay put. If only I were so lucky. The ham leans inexorably to one side, and I watch it fall in slow motion. With a sickening thud and what I'm sure is a crunch, it lands directly on my right foot, doing irreparable damage to my metatarsals. "Son of a gun!" I yell through gritted teeth and begin hopping around on my undamaged foot while holding the other in both hands. In order to grip my injured foot, I release the frozen food I've been holding, and all of it falls to the ground. Unbeknownst to me, a bag of frozen peas has opened on the floor when the pile falls, and when I land on top of them, they immediately roll under my foot like a pile of ball bearings. My leg shoots out from under me, and I have the presence of mind to grab the edge of the freezer as I fall, which of course does little to slow my descent toward the garage floor. What it does manage to do is jerk on the freezer enough to shift the precariously balanced lid off balance, and almost in the instant my coccyx connects painfully with the concrete, The freezer lid comes crashing down on my fingers, which are gripping the edge of the freezer. Hearing my screams, my wife comes rushing in from the house. "What on earth is going on in here?" she shouts. Wincing in pain, I gingerly pull myself up from the ground and lift the freezer lid off my hand, all while balancing on my uninjured foot. "I'm looking for the California mix," I groan. "Oh, honey, didn't you look at your phone? I texted you 10 minutes ago. I found the California mix in the fridge freezer. I must have brought it inside and forgot about it." I force a grin and hold up my gloved hands, giving my fingers a wiggle. "It's a little hard to get your phone out when you're wearing gloves, dear," I say with forced patience. "Well, put all this away," she says, surveying the food littering the garage floor. "You made a huge mess." With that, she goes back in the house. Moving like a patient escaped from the geriatric ward, I began slowly tossing items back into the freezer, saying a few things about California mix that shouldn't be repeated as I do so. One of the more memorable freezer experiences I've heard of occurred on Poverty Flats where I grew up. The Stevens family consisted of 4 sons, and with that many boys, life was a constant competition to see who could come up with the best ideas for adventures, which inevitably included getting into a fair amount of trouble. The oldest Stevens boy, Winston, came up with what he thought was a pretty good idea one summer day and shared it with his brothers. He had noticed that during the winter, frogs, snakes, and horny toads were pretty scarce, and having read that cold-blooded animals like reptiles and amphibians froze during the winter and then thawed during the spring, he decided they could apply this principle to the family's chest freezer. "What if we catch a bunch of frogs, lizards, and snakes and freeze them in the chest freezer?" Winston said. "Freeze them?" his brother Colton asked. "Won't that kill them?" "Nah, they'll come back to life when we defrost them. It'll be awesome." Not wanting to disagree with a great idea, the 3 other Stevens boys followed along as Winston headed out to their cow pasture to find some cold-blooded critters they could stow away in their mom's deep freeze. Being pretty well experienced in finding snakes and the like, it didn't take long before they had acquired a snake or 2, in addition to a horny toad and a pair of salamanders. It took a couple attempts to get the freezer lid shut without anything escaping, but where there's a will, there's a way. After several minutes, they got it accomplished, and after several more, the thumping sounds even died down, and all was silent inside the freezer. "Come on," Wilton said. "We have to let them get good and frozen, and then we'll take them out and watch them come back to life." As is often the case with young boys, they forgot about their plans, what with all the excitement of summer, and the fact that the snakes, frogs, and lizards didn't remind the boys of their presence. A week or so went by without incident. Inside the freezer, the reptiles and amphibians were cold and still. But not for long. Lynn Stevens, the boy's mother, was used to finding dead things in her freezer, but frozen snakes were a new one for her. Things probably wouldn't have been quite so bad if she hadn't been holding a basket of clean laundry with her free hand when she cracked the freezer lid. Freshly laundered clothes rained down around her as her scream rang through the garage and the freezer lid banged shut. By the time she had gathered all the clothes back up, her heart rate had almost returned to normal. But even then, she was determined to have a few strong words with her boys when they got back from irrigating with their dad. Lynn was shocked, but she was definitely not squeamish. Unceremoniously, she flung the freezer lid back open and tossed the boys' frigid finds out the garage door and onto the front walk. Frozen frogs and solid snakes bounced and skittered across the concrete, and without a backward glance, Lynn mashed the button to shut the garage door, grabbed what she had been looking for, and went into the house with her clean clothes. Outside, the summer sun beat down on the collection of cold-blooded critters, and they began to thaw. The frozen bull snake was still groggy when it heard a truck approach and come to a stop in front of the house. It was just starting to get the feeling back in its tail when footsteps approached. The snake wondered whether it could catch the defrosting frog before it disappeared into the flower bed, but didn't have a chance to find out before a rubber boot came down on its back. Accounts vary, but from what I've been able to gather, by the time Brian Stevens returned to solid ground, 2 of his sons had already reached the front porch, 1 had climbed a tree, and Wilton was back in the bed of the truck. They couldn't have moved faster if someone had lit the fuse on a stick of dynamite. Quite frankly, I'm not sure who was more surprised by the whole thing, Brian or the bull snake, but one thing I'm sure of is that the Stevens boys never forgot their experience with freezing cold-blooded vertebrates, and neither did Brian. The boys didn't get in too much trouble, though. Lynn was laughing too hard to be angry with them for long. Brian wasn't quite as enthused. Back at our home, a day had gone by since my freezer fiasco, and Lily, the boys, and I were headed out to do a little shopping since we were now out of frozen peas. I only limped a little bit as I hauled the baby in his car seat behind Lily and the 2 older boys. I was just pulling on my ball cap when Lily opened the door to the garage. A veritable wall of putrid hot air immediately assaulted my senses, and I wasn't even the one who opened the door. Lily retched, and Al Jr. and little Freddie plugged their noses. As quickly as she had opened it, Lily slammed the door closed. A cloud of green gas wafted around us in the summer heat and slowly began to drift away. After a moment, Lily choked out, "What on earth is that?" She turned slowly to glare at me with a look that could have melted solid rock. I mumbled, shaking my head and shrugging. "Why don't we just go out the front door and take the pickup? The AC is fixed in it now." Lily's eyes narrowed, and she let go of the handle to the garage door. "Whatever that horrific smell is, you're going to take care of it," she growled. I nodded quickly and gestured back towards the house. The truth was, I knew exactly what that awful nose-shredding stench was. There are few smells quite so potent as defrosting night crawlers. Well, there you have it. Another untold tale from this side of nowhere. Defrosting worms. I found out that they last for quite a while in the fridge, but don't do so hot in the freezer. Can't even, fool a fish with a previously frozen night crawler. If you have any experiences with deep freezes or freezing or any of the like, you can reach out to me on our Facebook page when this episode drops. You can also shoot me an email at untoldtalesofpodcast@gmail.com, and we will mention your comments on the podcast. I also do want to announce that Untold Tales from This Side of Nowhere is now available on YouTube, since Google Podcasts has gone away. So if you like to listen on YouTube, you can find us there as well. Just search up Untold Tales, the podcast, and you'll definitely find us. I think my handle is at Untold Tales, the podcast. So yeah, exciting new development for the new year there. And As always, it's been a pleasure listening. Well, you have been doing the listening. I've been doing the talking. It's been a pleasure sharing this podcast with you. This has been another untold tale from this side of nowhere, where we work twice as hard for half as much and still find time for the important things like fishing. See you next time, folks.